I want to marry Steve, a doctor, so please divorce him, old lady. One day, a young woman suddenly came to our house and said that the nightclub worker, who is 12 years younger than me, leaned on my husband Steve's arm. That's fine. But there's one condition. I smiled sweetly and looked at the two of them. I'll submit the divorce papers in front of you. So, will you two submit your marriage registration in front of me? The two, who had been dumbfounded, smiled scornfully and accepted. Trying not to burst out laughing, the three of us headed to the law office first. I am Cindy Holmes, 33 years old, and work at a certain hospital. My husband, Steve, of the same age, also works at the same hospital, and we had a workplace marriage. We don't often have days off together because we both have night shifts, and we haven't had children yet. Previously, both my parents and my in-laws mentioned wanting grandchildren, but now they seldom do. Since we are both busy and there are sudden calls, they seem to think that as long as I work at this hospital, having grandchildren is impossible. I feel a bit guilty towards our parents, but I find my current job very fulfilling. Steve also likes his current job and occasionally participates in skills improvement seminars. Therefore, his hard work at the hospital is well regarded, and we have been living busy but fulfilling days. The reason I started to have complaints about Steve began when the rules we set when we got married started to be disregarded. Initially, since we both have demanding jobs, we clearly set some rules regarding household chores. One of those was, the one who is not on night shift does the housework. It is because the one who is on night shift tends to be exhausted. Both Steve and I have irregular night shifts, making it difficult to share household chores by day or type. Therefore, we decided to base it on whether one has night shifts or not. When I had a night shift, Steve used to cook simple meals and do the cleaning and laundry. However, recently, even when he's not on night shift, he's often out at night. Hey, haven't you been leaving the house more often even when you're not on night shift? Oh, yeah. Sorry, there have been many seminars lately. I guess the instructor likes me. He keeps inviting me out for drinks. I initially refused, but you can't keep saying no. Once I accepted, I kept getting invited. Sorry, I'll ask him to reduce the frequency. Indeed, at this time, the hospital was conducting various seminars, some of which invited external instructors. Remembering this, I gently tapped his shoulder. That's fine, it means they expect a lot from you, right? Besides, the seminar will only last about 2 more weeks. Don't worry about home and just do your best. Thanks, that helps. Steve is a good listener and I always end up talking about various things. That's why it makes sense that the instructors liked him. He said he would pay for the drinking sessions out of his allowance, but at that pace, he would run out of money quickly. So I decided to pay for the drinking sessions from our living expenses for another 2 weeks. For the next 2 weeks, Steve started going out at night every time there was a seminar. Even after the seminars ended, his night outings continued. When I thought he might be having night shifts, a veteran cleaning lady told me otherwise. Dr. Holmes hardly has night shifts recently. We'd prefer to leave it to the young men since there are many elderly here. Apparently, he continued to go out at night even when he wasn't scheduled for night shifts. Just when I felt suspicious and was about to confront him, my schedule suddenly became very busy, leaving me no time to question him. When my hectic schedule finally eased, I no longer thought about confronting Steve. I just wanted to go home and sleep in bed. Exhausted, when I returned home from a night shift, there were unfamiliar high heels in our home. I'm home. Steve, is there a guest? Welcome back. Sorry for the suddenness, but there's something I need to talk about. When I went to the living room, there was an unfamiliar woman sitting next to him on the sofa. The woman, who looked about college age, was clinging to Steve's arm. Can I put my bag in my room? Yeah, that's fine. But I want you to hurry, if possible. The atmosphere clearly wasn't good, so I sighed and went to put my bag in the room. I returned to the living room still in my work clothes and sat directly across from Steve and the woman. This is our first meeting, isn't it? So, what do you need from me today? Nice to meet you. I'm Emma. I came today because I want you, old lady, to divorce Steve. I was more annoyed by her childish way of speaking than by her calling me an old lady. While holding my throbbing head, I looked at Steve, who momentarily faltered but then firmly met my gaze. Emma works at the nightclub I visited with the instructor. She's a college student working part-time to pay for her tuition, and she's really earnest. A college student? No offense, but how old are you? Are you even an adult? I'm 21 years old. That makes me 12 years younger than you, Auntie. That's hilarious. I gave up on retorting what was so funny and glared at Steve. So, you cheated on me when I was busy, and now you want to divorce me to be with a younger girl, is that right? Why do you have to put it in such bad terms? I just want to take care of Emma for the rest of my life. You can live on your own, but she needs me. Wow, you are so cool. I sighed as the two began to get cozy arm in arm right in front of me. Steve was completely smitten with Emma, finding everything she said adorable, which was incredibly irritating. When I called Emma by her name, she looked at me with a triumphant grin. Do you really want to marry this man? Even if you get married, he's the type to keep going to nightclubs and spouts nothing but pretentious nonsense. He's the kind of man who believes all the sales talk. Won't you regret it? Of course, I want to marry him. After all, Steve is a doctor and earns a lot. That's terrible to say, it's all nonsense. He promised he won't go to nightclubs after marrying me. We're in love, so it'll be fine. Steve then hugged her, visibly moved, and they retreated into their own world again. I looked at him with dismay, but our eyes never met. All right, if you two have decided, I'll grant you a divorce. But there's one condition. What's the condition? Oh, you mean division of property? I shook my head at his words and smiled sweetly at them. We're going to the law office now. After Steve and I submit our divorce papers, then next, I want you, Steve and Emma, to submit your marriage registration to the city office, just in front of me. That's all. The two were stunned by my words, but soon stood up, delighted, realizing that was all. At the law office, Steve and I first submitted our divorce papers. Then I asked the lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings as soon as possible in order to enable Steve to remarry Emma quickly. 6 months later, our divorce was finalized at last. The three of us headed to the city office, and Steve and Emma filled out the marriage registration, and I signed as a witness. I helped Emma, handing over her driver's license to the clerk. People around there gazed at me, which made me uncomfortable. The atmosphere of an ex-wife helping her former husband's new wife with the paperwork was uncomfortably conspicuous, and the clerk's eyes darted around. I felt a bit sorry, but I was too pleased with myself. I then went straight home, took all my belongings, and moved them to my parents' house. I hadn't shopped much due to my busy schedule, so I only took valuables and clothes, leaving the household items behind. I packed everything into a suitcase and moved by car within a day. When I got to my parents' house, they were furious with Steve, but I calmed them down with a smile. Don't worry, I'm not just going to let this go. I'll make sure they both get what they deserve. 3 days later, I was called to the hospital reception. There's a woman here demanding to see you, Dr. Holmes. What should I do? Please direct her to an available room. I'll come as soon as I finish with my current patient. When I arrived at the designated meeting room, Emma was there, as I had expected. Seeing me in my white coat, she widened her eyes in surprise. Hello, I'm Dr. Holmes, an internist. I've managed to spare 5 minutes between consultations, so let's make this quick, shall we? What do you mean? He wasn't a doctor, and you are, huh? She was panicking, but there was no time to calm her down. I told her with a smile. It's true that Steve works at this hospital, but he's a janitor. He's an important staff member responsible for everything from cleaning to disinfecting. What? He tricked me. She slammed her hand on a desk and started muttering complaints about him. You did listen back then, right? I told you Steve is a man who only brags and spouts nonsense. It's going to be tough, but good luck with your life from now on. You're joking. If he's not a doctor, I don't need such an old man. I waved my hand at her, who looked like she was about to explode, and left the meeting room. I could hear her trying to stop me, but I rushed back to the consultation room. I fist-bumped a nurse who knew the situation, caught my breath, and then called in the next patient. Later, Emma found Steve working at the hospital and demanded a divorce. As Emma shouted that there was no point in marrying him if he wasn't a doctor, he yelled back that love doesn't care about occupation. The spectacle of their argument was witnessed by the patients waiting for consultations and the nurses, quickly spreading throughout the hospital. Even the whispers of the people around them didn't reach the heated pair, and the situation escalated until security had to intervene. Just before the police were called, Emma fled the hospital, and Steve chased after her. When Emma got home, she screamed that she wanted a divorce and would take the house, also demanding property division. This caused a level of noise that disturbed the neighbors. Around the time our divorce became known in the hospital, I filed for property division against Steve. Whether the certified mail reached them or not, Steve and Emma soon came to my parents' house. What do you mean by claiming property division? You didn't set any conditions other than me remarrying Emma. Why are you claiming it now? They barged into the house and ranted, not caring that my parents were there. Because, Steve, you cheated while we were married, and Emma, you knew he was married and still had an affair, right? So, of course, what goes around comes around. Emma, you could help him pay that money. Don't mess with me. I did nothing wrong, and I definitely won't pay. Are you that desperate for money? Even becoming a doctor hasn't cleaned up your greedy attitude. Despite Emma and Steve's yelling, it didn't bother me at all. Do you know why I included your remarriage as a condition for our divorce? They looked puzzled and frowned. One reason is, I wanted everyone to see that Steve switched to another woman while still married to me. Normally, divorcing and remarrying right away is like saying the new spouse is the affair partner. Well, even if I didn't do that, you two made enough noise at the hospital for everyone to know. The other reason is, I wanted to make sure I could get property division from you. I thought Emma was just your stage name, and I didn't know where you worked or what kind of person you were. That's why I had you fill out the marriage registration and helped with the process all the way. Thanks to that, I got to see all your identification documents and proofs. You know, you have to change the address on your driver's license when you get married, right? While Steve grimaced, her face turned increasingly pale. So, I'll leave the rest to my lawyer. You can try to dodge or run away, but don't forget that I have all your personal information. For Emma, who works as a nightclub worker, protecting her personal information is crucial to avoid being easily identified or stalked. As I smiled, Emma fled with loud footsteps. Steve, left stunned, clicked his tongue at me and then chased after her. I sighed in relief as my house finally quieted down, calming my furious parents. After that, Emma has been steadily paying the part of the property division. Considering she's a college student, I presented a small amount, which she will likely finish paying within the year. Emma seems to want a divorce, but Steve is resisting, and she doesn't have the means to hire a lawyer for divorce negotiations. So, although they can't divorce, they are living separately. Ultimately, Emma is also to blame for believing that Steve was a doctor just because she saw the same last name on the hospital's directory. Even though she's still a college student, working in customer service should have taught her to draw clear lines between customers and employees. Maybe a well-paying doctor seemed like an ideal marriage partner for a young woman, but getting involved with a married man was inexcusable. This incident has taught her a painful lesson about the consequences of recklessly destroying someone's family. As for Steve, he disappeared from the hospital without me having to do anything. In fact, after he left the hospital to chase Emma, he was in the middle of his shift. Therefore, the veteran janitor, who is Steve's boss, was furious. Her face red with anger, she wrote. Left work without permission due to a romantic dispute. In big letters on his shift schedule. This news quickly spread to other janitors who were off that day. The uproar became hot news among the staff, and patients spread their versions of the story. As a result, Steve, maligned and ostracized, eventually broke down when no one would even return his greetings. One day, he abruptly resigned. Later, he returned to his parents' home, where his father, already informed of the situation, gave him a severe reprimand. Although Steve didn't apologize, his mother transferred the full amount of the property division I had requested, so I decided not to worry about it any further. In the hospital, I received approaches from male doctors and nurses who heard I was now single. However, I've declined all offers, thinking I'm not ready for marriage just yet. I continue to work as an internist, busy but dedicated to each patient I see.
Hey, my luggage has arrived at my parents' house. But what's this all about?
Your luggage arrived? I was thinking it's time for you to move out, so I sent all your stuff over there.
Why? Why would you suddenly say something like that?
Well, I've got a girlfriend now. I've decided to break up with you and marry her.
What? You were cheating on me?
She's younger than you, not sluggish, and exactly my type unlike how you look. She's totally a better version of you. There's no competition.
Do you understand? What you're doing is adultery, you know? And our baby could be born any time now, right?
I know. You want me to take responsibility, right? I'll pay the compensation for the affair and child support. Is $10,000 enough for the affair, or maybe $20,000? How about $500 per month for child support?
During my maternity leave, my husband sent my belongings to my parents' house. He doesn't even try to hide that he's having an affair. For my capable, high-income husband, the cost of compensation and child support seems trivial if it means he can marry his girlfriend.
I'll contact you later with more details. I'm taking the house and living there with her, so don't come back.
At my husband's words, I thought God must be planning to punish my husband. Fine, I'm better off without someone like you. Let's get divorced quickly.
Yeah, I get it. I'll contact you soon.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad we can get a divorce smoothly.
I think my husband misunderstood my last words. Probably before long, my husband will face serious trouble. The house he said he would take to live with her was actually... I'm Amy. I'm 29 years old and I'm an office worker. I'm introverted and not particularly outstanding at my job. That's why I thought of myself as a background character in society. However, just before turning 30, I achieved a major reversal in my life.
Looks like there aren't many good properties near our workplace, huh?
There are good properties, but they're either too small or too far from the station. It's hard to find something that fits our criteria. I'm currently house hunting with Kevin, who will soon be my husband. We're frustrated as we check out the properties offered by real estate agents and online, saying neither here nor there. It's a problem that we can't find a house, but I secretly enjoy house hunting, leaning on my husband. So I always try hard to keep from grinning with happiness, always looking seriously troubled. I am at the pinnacle of happiness, but this isn't what I meant by a major turning point. It's a reversal just because I, a background character, got married. But my husband-to-be works for a multinational corporation, so it's a big reversal. We come from different worlds, but we met through a mutual acquaintance. And to my surprise, he approached me. Because I can't believe it myself, I often ask my husband, "Hey, what did you like about someone like me?"
You're asking that question again? It's your modesty. Nowadays, many women are tough and strong-willed, right? Not good with women like that.
My husband always looks clearly annoyed when I ask the same thing over and over. However, even though he seems bothered, he always gives the same answer, which I love. When he says I'm modest, he's referring to my introverted side. The reason my husband approached me was simply that he liked my face. When I first heard it, I thought it was a bit rude, but as we spent time together, he became attracted to my modesty. I'll forgive my husband's rude remarks because of the happiness we have now. Conversely, what attracted me to my husband was how assertively he leads.
Gather more property information. Also, did you tell the person in charge about the change in the wedding menu?
I'm planning to call about the menu tomorrow.
What, you haven't told them yet? Make sure you take care of important things quickly.
Yes, I'll be careful. My husband sighs and starts putting away the property documents he spread out. I'm often burdened with various tasks by my husband. Also perhaps because he's too capable, he sometimes makes remarks that seem to look down on me. We aren't married yet, but maybe this is what they call a dominant husband? Some might think it's unbelievable. However, for an introvert like me, it's better to be told what to do. So I think my compatibility with my husband isn't bad. Eventually the wedding day is approaching, and we still haven't found a property. Since we didn't live together before marriage, we hoped to start living together marked by our wedding. It seems tough now, so we have to make a decision.
I was thinking we could rent until we have kids, but now, should we just buy that house?
Yes, that seems the most realistic. My husband takes out one of the property documents he had compiled and places it on the table. This property is an almost 40-year-old detached house. It has remained unsold while new homes are built around it, apparently. It's well maintained for being 40 years old, but it's certainly not livable as it is.
Then let's buy this house and renovate it.
Yes, considering the construction period, it won't be ready by the wedding, but the location and size meet all our requirements. But suddenly buying a house, are you sure we have the funds?
It's fine, leave it to me.
My husband looks confident. Many wives would be nervous if their husband suddenly decided to buy a house on impulse. However, since my husband's income is high and I also have a job, it's not unreasonable. Therefore, we decided to buy a house right after getting married. Following our marriage, buying a house added another element of happiness to my life at a breakneck pace, almost crushing me with joy. However, the purchase of this house will lead to an unbelievable situation later on. Once we decided to buy the house, we had to start looking for a renovation contractor. Of course, finding a contractor was my responsibility. Since it's a house we'll be living in for a long time, I proceeded with the contractor search cautiously. However, with the wedding approaching, my husband seemed impatient.
Hey, have you found a contractor yet?
Just give me a little more time. I'm still looking.
You're as slow as ever.
But this is important.
If I leave it to you, it seems like we'll never be able to live in this house. I'll handle arranging the contract too.
I'm sorry. As usual, while discussing marriage and our life afterward in my husband's room, I ended up being scolded by him. Feeling sorry for not fulfilling my duty to find a contractor and inconveniencing my husband, I couldn't say anything. Once my husband started looking for contractors, he had arrangements made within a few days, and the construction began the following week. It wasn't surprising. He's efficient in everything he does. With my husband's speed, it's no wonder he finds me slow. While the house renovation was ongoing, our wedding went smoothly. Since we couldn't live in the house yet, I decided to continue living in my husband's room. It's a bit disappointing not to start married life from our own home, but in exchange, another happiness came our way. Kevin, I might be pregnant.
Really?
My husband jumped for joy like a child upon hearing about my pregnancy.
I didn't expect to have a child so soon, and at this timing?
I shared the same sentiment as my husband. I thought we'd have a child eventually, so it was surprising to find out about the pregnancy right after the wedding. I think it was a good decision to buy the house. 2 months after the wedding, the renovation of the house finally finished, and we were able to live together. It's become so beautiful compared to before.
You're right. With a child on the way, it was a good purchase.
I walked briskly around the still sparsely furnished house, excited about starting our married life in earnest. However, 3 months after starting to live in our own home, my husband and I ended up living separately. Hey, have you looked into the creaking floor in the hallway?
No, not yet. I'll call the contractor tomorrow, but more importantly, you're 8 months pregnant now, right? Take some paid leave and go home to your parents' place early.
Huh? I planned to start maternity leave 6 weeks before the due date, remember?
It'll be hard to move around once another month passes. Go home now while you still can.
Okay, I understand. When my husband told me to go home early, I ended up being late for dinner. Having maternity leave at my parents' place was something we had discussed and decided on earlier. Also, since the handover of work for maternity leave is progressing, it's not a problem to start the break a little early. However, I wanted to spend as much time with my husband at home as possible. Since I thought my husband felt the same, I was a little shocked when he told me to go home early. But since it was what my husband wanted, I decided to obey obediently. The following week, I went back to my parents' place for childbirth. Okay, I'll leave the house to you.
Yeah, it's fine, don't worry.
By the way, about the wall in the kitchen.
Don't worry about it. I've been living alone for a long time. I can handle household chores.
Not just that, but also the windows.
Yeah, I got it. I'll take care of it properly.
Perhaps thinking I was being too persistent, my husband pushed me out of the entrance. As I stepped outside, my husband waved with a smile. Since it was my husband, I trusted he would take care of everything about the house. Mom, Dad, I'm home.
Welcome back. Must have been tough, huh?
Not really, I'm okay. When I arrived home, my mom greeted me at the entrance. Feeling a little awkward about her concern, I averted my gaze. I couldn't bring myself to say that it was a luxury to spend $200 on a taxi ride from home.
Oh, you're back. Must have been tough, huh?
No, not really. When I entered the living room, my dad was there. Again, I glanced away at my dad's words. Needless to say, home is comfortable. At home, my husband tended to be somewhat dominant, and I did most of the housework, but at my parents' house, I only needed to help out a bit. Both of my parents are still in their 60s, so they both work. Since my mom works part-time, she comes home from work in the early afternoon, leaving me alone at home in the morning. I spent this time doing light chores like cleaning and laundry as if it were exercise. Since my mom takes care of the household chores in the afternoon, I don't have to do much. Having nothing to do feels strangely unsettling. So I stick to my mom's side every day, wondering if there's anything I can help with. Since I have a lot of free time, I'd like to contact my husband and catch up leisurely, but since I returned to my parents' house, I've hardly received any messages from my husband, nor did he visit my parents' house.
Still no contact from Kevin?
Yeah, no call from him at all. There are things I need to tell him, so I really want him to get in touch soon.
I wonder what's going on. He hasn't even shown his face here for a month, and I'm worried.
He must be working freely without me there. While peeling an apple with a worried expression, my mom handed it to me. I gratefully bit into the apple. My mom was probably imagining negative scenarios like my husband falling ill or having an affair. However, my husband is a capable man, and we are about to have a child. So I didn't believe he could be ill or having an affair. My naive thoughts were soon painfully corrected. One afternoon, while my mom and I were relaxing and watching TV, the doorbell rang. Who is it?
Looks like a package has arrived.
Receiving packages wasn't unusual. However, my mom looked puzzled and headed to the entrance. I sat in the living room and waited for her. From the entrance, I could faintly hear my mom and a man who seemed to be a delivery person talking, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. After a while, my mom came back with a look of confusion, turning into panic.
Oh, wait a minute. Your stuff from your house has arrived. But what does this mean?
What? What do you mean? I returned her question with a question, not understanding what she meant. To clarify the situation, I slowly stood up and headed towards the supposed delivery. What is this? What's going on? Outside the house, there was a moving truck loaded with lots of cardboard boxes. I opened one box and found my clothes inside. Opening another, it was also filled with my clothes. It seemed that all the contents were my belongings from our house. I didn't understand the situation, but there was nothing I could do about the delivered items. The boxes were pushed into a spare room at my parents' house. The room, completely filled with cardboard boxes, was overwhelming. After seeing off the movers, I called my husband, not expecting him to answer as usual. However, this time he picked up immediately. Hey, my luggage has arrived at my parents' house. But what's this all about?
Your luggage arrived? I was thinking it's time for you to move out, so I sent all your stuff over there.
Why? Why would you suddenly say something like that?
Well, I've got a girlfriend now. I've decided to break up with you and marry her.
What? He referred to her as his girlfriend, but this was clearly adultery. Moreover, he was openly declaring it to me, his wife. I was so shocked by my husband's words that everything around me seemed to spin. You were cheating on me?
Well, yes, I suppose. We started dating before the wedding. Every man get cold feet, you know. She was there for me when I was struggling, and we ended up together. I thought I couldn't cancel the wedding, so I went through with it, but I just couldn't give her up. After living with her in our house, it became clear she was better than you, and I was able to decide on divorce.
Living together? You mean your mistress has been staying at our house for the past month?
Calling her my mistress is rude. She's practically my fiancée now.
I'm still here, so she's your mistress. I was so dizzy from anger that I found myself shouting at my husband. My mom, listening to the call nearby, looked very anxious as I mentioned the word affair. I thought I shouldn't make her more anxious, so I forcibly suppressed my anger. You wanted me to go back to my parents' house early so you could live with her, didn't you?
She's younger than you, not sluggish, and exactly my type, unlike how you look. She's totally a better version of you. There's no competition.
Do you understand? What you're doing is adultery, you know? And our baby could be born any time now, right?
I know. You want me to take responsibility, right? I'll pay the compensation for the affair and child support. Is $10,000 enough for the affair? Or maybe $20,000? How about $500 per month for child support?
I could imagine my husband smirking through the phone. He is a capable office worker with a high income. The cost of compensation and child support, if it means he can marry his girlfriend, probably doesn't seem like a big expense to him. In contrast, I am just a background character. As his wife's inferior replacement, I doubt I could stop him from divorcing me. Therefore, I had no choice but to accept the divorce. While I wanted to reject the compensation and child support as a regular employee at a general company, I needed the money from my husband. This was utterly humiliating. I gripped my smartphone so hard in frustration and shame.
Well, that's how it is. The divorce is decided. I'll contact you later with more details. I'm taking the house and living there with her, so don't come back.
At my husband's words, I thought there must be a God. Surely God is planning to punish my husband. Fine, I'm better off without someone like you. Let's get divorced quickly.
Yeah, I get it. I'll contact you soon.
Thank you, that helps.
Yeah, that's right. I'm glad we get a divorce smoothly.
After the call ended, my mom looked at me worriedly, trying to peek at my face. Therefore, I showed a smile to reassure her. I think my husband misunderstood my last words of thanks. Probably before long, my husband will face a serious situation. 3 months later, having safely given birth to a baby girl named Mia, I was still at my parents' house. The daughter was too adorable and I couldn't bear to leave her even for a moment, so I kept postponing looking for a new place. The divorce was already finalized and I was set to receive compensation and child support. I had no regrets about my ex-husband and felt refreshed by the divorce. The discussions and procedures were all settled, so I no longer had any dealings with my ex-husband. Or so I thought, until he suddenly called again. It seems like he finally realized the situation.
Hey, what's going on?
What do you mean, what's going on?
About the house. You were talking about the floors and walls, weren't you? Don't tell me you knew.
Yes, I knew. You hired a fraudulent contractor to renovate our house.
Why didn't you tell me?
I tried to tell you, but every time I called, you were too busy having fun with her to call back, weren't you? Besides, I had already told you about the creaky floors before I went back to my parents' house, and I asked you to look into it, didn't I? Well, you were too busy thinking about sending me back to my parents' house to listen seriously. My ex-husband has searched for a contractor because I was slow in finding one. As soon as he started looking, the construction on the house began. I was impressed with how efficiently he managed it, but it turned out he had searched online without checking the contractor's reviews, reputation, or track record, and had just looked at the price before making a snap decision. As a result, he had unwittingly chosen a fraudulent contractor. After living there for only 3 months, I noticed strange things like creaking in the hallway, cracks in the kitchen walls, and screws missing from the window frames. After returning to my parents' house, my suspicion grew, and upon investigating, I discovered that the contractor was indeed fraudulent. I had tried to contact my ex-husband to tell him about this, but he was too busy enjoying his time with her to return my calls, and we ended up divorcing before I could tell him.
Because of you, the response was delayed, and now I'm arguing with the contractor. We've lived there for about 6 months, and they keep insisting that it's our fault for how we lived in it. As we argue, the floor creaking has gotten worse, the cracks in the walls have gotten bigger, and the doors don't close properly anymore. The house is a mess.
That must make it quite uncomfortable to live in, huh?
I've moved out now and rented an apartment because if I continued living there, they'd keep saying the damage was due to how I lived in it. I've consulted a lawyer, but for some reason it seems like we're in a tough position. But I'm planning to sue them anyway.
The house is falling apart. You're heading to court. Sounds really tough. But what does that have to do with me? Did you call me to tell me all this?
Yes, if you had told me sooner that you noticed the contractor was fraudulent, it might not have come to this.
And what if I had?
Well, the child support can stay at $500 a month, but I need to lower the monthly payments for the $20,000 in compensation.
What? I was surprised that my prideful, capable ex-husband was suddenly asking me about money issues.
We moved, right? So now we need to pay for the land, house, renovation loan, and the rent for the apartment. I'm planning to sue the contractor, but I don't know how that'll turn out. And there are lawyer fees, and I might have to pay for the house repairs myself.
Didn't you say your wife was more competent at work than I am? Doesn't she earn a decent income?
Actually, my wife was a coworker at my workplace. I told everyone at the company that I divorced you and then married her, but it seems our relationship had been rumored inside the company for a while.
So she ended up facing cold looks at work, huh?
She couldn't stand it and ended up changing jobs, and her salary drastically decreased. I can't afford to change jobs and lose income, so I'm staying at the company, but even then, money is really tight.
My ex-husband, who had initiated contact with a fraudulent contractor and caused a huge mess, and whose position at work had deteriorated due to his affair, was in a difficult situation. What an example of self-sabotage. Although he was a high earner, being just over 30 and burdened with such payments, it was understandably tough. But it's all his own fault, and none of my concern now. It'll probably be tough for you from here on, but make sure you keep your promises.
Wait a minute.
I ignored my ex-husband and hung up the phone. The last thing I heard from him was a pathetic sound that made him seem anything but the elite he once was. After hearing my ex-husband's voice for the first time in a while, I felt a bit unpleasant and decided to spend some time watching my daughter sleep. In the end, my ex-husband's claims about the defective house did not hold up, and it seemed he had to accept his losses. Fraudulent contractors continue their deceitful practices because they possess various nefarious skills. Even the elite are no match for a fraudulent contractor on their own. My ex-husband had intended to repair the house, but there were various unseen problems, and significant expenses were necessary. It's only natural to not want to live in a house plagued with such issues. My ex-husband ended up selling the house. Since the house was riddled with defects, it had no value as a building, so he decided to demolish it and sell just the land. The land sold, but the loan remained, leaving my ex-husband with debt. Though the debt remained, with the house issues resolved, my ex-husband changed jobs. Judging that he could manage the payments even with a lower income, he left his uncomfortable workplace. After being hit with major house troubles right after getting married and being exposed for having an affair at work, which led to a necessary job change, my ex-husband's wife started blaming him for their situation. Their relationship deteriorated and his wife eventually left the house. Thus, my ex-husband now lives alone in an apartment. Having switched to a lower-paying job, and with monthly payments for the debt, compensation, and child support, his once affluent lifestyle as an elite is gone, and he appears to be living frugally. My ex-husband rushed into an affair and ended up losing money, his house, and his family. Love is truly blind. I plan to start looking for an apartment to live with my daughter soon. When I discussed my situation with my company, they agreed to accommodate me with reduced hours, so there was no need to change jobs. I am grateful for that. Returning to work will be challenging, so I plan to fully enjoy my time with my adorable daughter while I still can. During my overseas business trip, I received a midnight call from my husband, Brian. "Hey, why don't you divorce me?" I was stunned and could only utter, "What?" I thought this moment might finally come, but I never expected it to happen while I was on a business trip abroad. "What do you mean? Can you explain properly?" Then Brian chuckled through his nose. "You might not have noticed, but I've had a lover. She's younger and cuter than you. Plus, we already have a child together." As I remained silent, Brian continued, "So, I'm going to live with my lover and our child, and I've sold our house and car." He said this proudly, waiting for my response, to which I briefly replied, "Okay." What? He must have thought I would break down and cry. That was a naive thought. I had long been prepared, so this wouldn't shake me. A few days later, a frantic Brian was at the airport upon returning home. "My name is Susan Gale. I am a 34-year-old working housewife. I was raised in an ordinary middle-class family in the U.S. and have loved learning Spanish since attending Spanish classes in elementary school. In middle school, I was top of my Spanish class. In high school, I experienced a homestay in Spain. Eventually, I dreamed of working for a multinational company and pursued a degree in business management at a prestigious university. During my studies, I also studied abroad, steadily climbing the steps toward my dream. During job hunting, I worked hard and, although I missed my first choice, I received an offer from my second choice, a multinational company. My family, especially my sister Kathy, was overjoyed. Way to go, Susan. I'm so proud of you. Take care of yourself when you start working." I nodded and thanked my supportive family. The job turned out to be more demanding than I imagined. Although the company was relatively non-toxic, the quality of work expected was high, and my early 20s involved a lot of overtime. However, I had the support of wonderful superiors and colleagues, and I found great fulfillment in the job I had always wanted. As I dedicated myself to my work over the years, my efforts were recognized, and I gradually took on more important tasks. Friends would say, "Susan is all about her career. You're cool. Such a strong woman." Though they saw me that way, I had a soft spot for cute things. I collected merchandise of my favorite characters and slept with stuffed animals. Since my job was demanding, I gave up on owning pets, but often visited cat cafes on my days off to unwind. Although I maintained a professional demeanor at work, I had a strong desire to be comforted, especially because of my busy schedule. As I approached my late 20s, many of my peers married and had children. Invited to a friend's wedding, people would say, "Susan, you should get married soon." But I could only reply, "I'm too busy with work." I was focused on my career and couldn't see any of my male colleagues or business partners romantically. Am I going to be alone forever? But at that time, I was okay with living for my work. One day, I was invited to yet another friend's wedding.
As usual, I brought a gift and clapped my hands. Despite my participation, I felt uneasy. I had just turned 30. If I were to consider marriage, it was time to start looking for a partner. The wedding reception continued, and I went to the bar at the venue. While watching the lively participants and the shy bride and groom from afar, I was drinking alone at the counter when suddenly I was approached. "Are you alone? May I sit next to you?" His voice caught me off guard because it sounded like a voice actor's. "That's what you call a nice voice." "Yes, of course." As I responded, I looked at the man who sat next to me. He was about my height, which is tall for a woman, and seemed younger than me. His face was ordinary in a good way, a contrast to his voice. "Are you a guest at this wedding?" I answered, "A friend of the bride." "I'm a high school friend of the groom." "Would you like to join me for a drink?" Nodding, I drank and talked with Brian. "Wow, you work at that multinational company." "Even I know about it." "That's impressive." "To me, a regular employee at a small company, you seem like someone from another world." That's how Brian introduced himself, and our conversation flowed. Eventually, we exchanged contacts before parting. Later, we started seeing each other privately. Brian was 2 years younger than me and worked in sales at a small company. He was kind, gentle, a good listener, and good at giving compliments. I enjoyed talking with him. During one of our dates, Brian confessed his feelings, and I happily accepted. His annual income was a third of mine, but that didn't matter to me at the time. As our relationship progressed, I found Brian quite charming. There's a phrase in a drama, "Cute is the strongest," and that perfectly describes him. If you originally thought someone was cool or reliable, there might come a moment when you suddenly feel disillusioned. However, because they are cute, you can forgive the little things. Brian, being younger and always earnest, endeared himself to me. Whenever he asked for a homemade meal, I happily obliged. After a year and a half of dating, Brian presented me with a ring and said, "I've always admired how cool and sometimes cute you are, Susan. I would love it if you'd marry me." Surprised yet delighted, I accepted the ring. "Thank you, Brian. I'm looking forward to our life together as husband and wife." Brian cheered, yes, and I smiled at his joy. Later, we visited each other's parents to announce our marriage. Brian's parents were kind, simple folk who blessed our union. My family was generally favorable, and they entrusted me to Brian. My already married sister, Kathy, quietly told me, "He's just the type of guy you'd pick, Susan. But remember, don't spoil him too much." I laughed at her words and replied, "I know." And so, our life together began. I decided to buy a condo at the same time we got married. It was a brave purchase, but thinking of the future, it seemed the better choice. I chose a slightly larger 4-room to accommodate us and any future children. I thought this would mark the beginning of our sweet life together, but I was met with a harsh reality. Brian could hardly do any household chores. Since he had lived with his parents and relied on his mother for housework, I told him understandingly, "Brian, now that we're married, let's share the household duties. If you don't know how, I'll teach you." Brian frowned and replied, "What? Since we're married, shouldn't you, the wife, do the chores?" I firmly responded, "No. My job is demanding. You need to learn to do some housework. Come on, get up. I'll show you how to use the washing machine." Reluctantly, Brian got up, and I began to teach him the basics of housekeeping. However, he frequently shirked his responsibilities afterward. He started doing some cleaning and laundry, but everything was done half-heartedly, and I often had to redo them. His cooking was disastrous, and I ended up making meals in advance to manage. I tried not to discourage his efforts and avoided being harsh. Instead, I praised him even for his incomplete attempts, hoping to encourage improvement. Yet, Brian took advantage of my leniency and started to cut corners even more in his chores. Unable to bear it any longer, I confronted him. Brian, stop taking advantage of me. You need to learn to do the chores properly. I'm busy with work and I have trips, so you must be able to manage on your own, right? Brian's face darkened. What's up with you, Susan? You've changed since we got married. Always nagging. Since you earn well, why don't we just outsource the housework? I was astounded. Just because I earned more didn't mean we could frivolously spend money. Despite multiple discussions, Brian's neglect of the chores remained unchanged. One day, a year after our marriage, I came home to find Brian with a pale face. Brian, what's wrong? You look terrible. He began to explain. Actually, the company is going bankrupt due to the recession. I'll be unemployed from next month. I gasped in surprise. His overtime had increased over the last 6 months. But I had no idea his company was in such bad shape. So, what are you going to do now? Any plans for a new job? I'll think about it while collecting unemployment benefits. I'm tired, and the mental strain is significant, so let me take my time. I decided to give Brian some space. Considering that unemployment benefits would be coming in and there was no need to rush. However, once his company went under and he no longer had to go to work, Brian began playing video games all day. Even when I returned home late, the chores were undone. And all I saw was Brian engrossed in his video games. This continued for months, and I grew increasingly frustrated. Hey, Brian, you've rested enough, right? Isn't it time to start working? Brian's response was, I want to think carefully about the next job. In my last job, I was just being exploited. Next, I want something where I can fulfill myself. Though I felt like collapsing in frustration, I couldn't drag a reluctant Brian to the employment office. I continued to look after a languishing Brian even after his unemployment benefits ran out. One day, as Brian was immersed in his games, I sarcastically suggested, if you love gaming so much, why not try streaming? You might earn some change. Brian's eyes lit up. That's a great idea. You're so smart, Susan. I'll try doing live streams. I have a good feeling about this. While it was good to see Brian motivated for once, I wondered if this was a positive development. So, buy me the streaming gear and computer. Surprised, I hesitated, but Brian nonchalantly insisted. I don't have much savings. I'm serious about this, so please help me out. Reluctantly, I bought the equipment he requested. Even though becoming a streamer isn't easy, I hoped that facing reality would motivate Brian to work seriously. Then, a few months later, the situation took an unexpected turn. Surprisingly, Brian, now known as B, the game streamer, became popular and started ranking in the charts. Online comments like "nice voice" and "his poor gameplay is funny" gathered him a fan base of both men and women. Notably, Brian partially concealed his face during streams and did not disclose that he was married. See, I told you I can make it. Finally, the world recognizes my worth. Brian was quite pleased with himself. It seemed he had forgotten all about the support I provided, including the equipment I bought to get him started. It's great that you've succeeded, Brian. So, could you start contributing some of the money you've earned from streaming to our household expenses? Since Brian's unemployment benefits had ended, he hadn't contributed financially at all. Naturally, now that he was earning, I expected him to contribute. What? We can live on your salary alone, so why bother? Let's keep our finances separate. I was stunned by his response. But Brian truly began to keep all the money he earned from streaming for himself. By this time, he had lost the sincerity he had during our dating days, and had become completely dependent on me. Around the same time, I purchased a car. Although it was a loan-financed luxury foreign car that I only drove on weekends, I treasured it. Hey, let me drive your car, Susan. One day, Brian said this, so I asked him, you only stream from home and don't use it for work, right? Despite this, Brian insisted, we're married, so it should be fine. Eventually, I handed over the keys to him. After that, Brian began to go out on his own during weekdays when I wasn't around. Brian's popularity as a streamer continued to rise, and he became well known, leading to a lavish lifestyle and dressing in brand items. I was saddened by the change Brian. Nevertheless, as we were married, I continued this life for several years. As our 4th year of marriage approached, I was entrusted with a significant position at work and began to travel more frequently for business, whether I was away for a few days or up to 3 weeks. I'd come back to a home that looked more like a garbage dump than a house. Brian would stay holed up in his room, engrossed in his streaming. He still relied entirely on me for a living, and we barely spoke as a couple. I started to wonder why I was still married to him. I then began to gather the necessary documents and prepare for a divorce. One day, I was set to go on a 2-week business trip overseas. Brian, I'm going overseas again tomorrow, so I'll be leaving. I said this, but Brian didn't even respond as he was busy with his phone. Then I boarded my flight and spent the days abroad working hard. However, on the 10th night, Brian called me. Hello, Brian. Consider the time difference. It's the middle of the night here. I said groggily, and then Brian dropped a bombshell. Hey, Susan, let's get a divorce. I was stunned and could only utter, what? I thought this moment might finally come. But I never expected it to happen while I was on a business trip abroad. What do you mean? Can you explain properly? Then Brian chuckled through his nose. You might not have noticed, but I've had a lover. She's younger and cuter than you. Plus, we already have a child together. As I remained silent, Brian continued. So, I'm going to live with my lover and our child, and I've sold our house and car. Brian said this confidently, waiting for my response, to which I simply replied, okay. Brian muttered, what? He must have thought I would break down and cry. That was a naive thought. I had long been prepared, so this wouldn't shake me. You want a divorce, right? Understood. There's a completed divorce form in the living room drawer, just get it out. As I spoke calmly, Brian tried to act tough. You prepared the divorce form? Good preparation. Well, this is it then. Live miserably as a woman who was dumped by her husband. I almost laughed as I replied. Okay, whatever. I'm going back to sleep. Goodbye. I then hung up the phone on Brian and blocked his calls. After that, I called my sister in the US to arrange something and slept soundly until morning. The next day, I returned to work as usual and worked hard until the last day of my trip. Finally, it was time to go home. The business class seat provided by my company was comfortable, and I fell asleep again. I slept well. Looks like I can get back to my routine without any jet lag. I stretched and disembarked from the plane, feeling refreshed. As I was about to leave the airport lobby, hey, Susan. I saw someone running towards me. It was a frantic Brian. Oh, what are you doing here? I didn't ask for a pickup. As I said this, Brian started ranting in a half-crazed manner. What are you doing to me? You took the car and the house. Now I was taken aback by his unreasonable behavior. I don't understand what you're trying to say. Can I go now? I'm tired. As I tried to walk past him while yawning, Brian blocked my way. Wait a minute. Listen to me, he shouted, so I stopped. I'll explain everything in order. Well, first of all, I filed the divorce papers after that. Okay. I responded casually, without looking at Brian, as I fiddled with my phone. Are you listening? So, since a real estate agent was supposed to visit to discuss selling the house, I went back home after submitting the divorce papers, only to find a lock on the outside of the door that prevented me from entering. Since there was nothing else I could do, I tried to go to my other house. But there was a padlock on the car tires like an anti-theft lock, and I couldn't drive. I called you, but you didn't answer. You blocked my calls, didn't you? At that point, I sighed. Yes, I blocked your calls, so? Brian turned red and stomped his feet. Did you put the lock on the house and the car tire too? How did you manage that while you were abroad? I casually answered. I asked my sister to take care of it. Brian's eyes widened in shock. Your sister? Yes, you said you sold the house and the car. But when my sister checked, they were still intact. You were probably just bragging about selling them after getting an estimate from the agent, right? Brian's face turned red again. That's true, but everything was set for the sale. And it's all ruined because of you. I became exasperated. No, it wouldn't have been possible to sell them anyway. The house and the car are in my name, and all the necessary documents for the sale are at my parents' house. Brian looked dumbfounded. Seriously, did you think a stranger who isn't even the owner could just sell a house? And a car just like that? Of course, the owner's confirmation is required, and there are documents to handle, right? Brian was at a loss for words. During our marriage, you left all the troublesome paperwork to me. That's why you don't know these basic things, I said dismissively, and Brian glared at me. If you knew it couldn't be sold, why did you lock the house and the car? Because of that, I couldn't enter the house or use the car. It was a huge hassle. I sighed and explained. Who would want someone who's cheating and seeking a divorce in their own house? And the same goes for the car. They're in my name, so I just took measures for security. Brian glared at me with bloodshot eyes. What? That look. Just because you couldn't freely sell my stuff, you make that face? You are unattractive. That's what I hated about you. Acting like you can do everything by yourself, and despite being a woman, you're too presumptuous. I calmly responded. Is that so? Then we shouldn't have gotten married in the first place. Brian snorted. It was obvious I married you for your money. The only benefit of marrying you was your earnings from the multinational company. I could sense the malice from Brian, his desperate intent to hurt me. However, it did not affect me at all. Thinking about it, there was no benefit for me in marrying you. As I said this profoundly, Brian became enraged. What right do you have to act so high and mighty? Damn it, I'm dumping you. My mistress is hundreds of times cuter than you, and she has even had my child. It must be frustrating for you, knowing my mistress is superior to you as a woman. I almost laughed. Superior to me, huh? Brian exclaimed. What do you mean? I pulled a photograph from my bag. This is your mistress, right? Tracy Foster. I showed him the picture of a woman in her early 20s with a cute appearance. Brian's eyes darted back and forth in shock. What? You knew about Tracy. I smiled sweetly and informed him. You weren't the only one who wanted a divorce. I had been gathering evidence for a while. You were careless. Didn't you know the type of dashcam in the car retains video footage? Brian turned pale, but I continued. It was easy to figure out the times you met from the dashcam footage. I just had to ask a detective agency to gather the evidence. It was easy to pinpoint your affair partner, especially since she was already pregnant. As I explained, Brian was stunned, but then he tried to recover. Don't do anything to her. She's having a tough time postpartum. And she's still young with no money. Besides, she didn't know I was married. I exaggeratedly furrowed my brow. You're protective of her. You must love Tracy. Of course. She's pure, cute. She's the one for me. I'll protect her and our child no matter what. As Brian spoke vehemently, I played the video. It was footage from the dashcam. Brian was driving my car, and Tracy, pregnant, was sitting next to him. Brian, thank you for taking me out today. The food was delicious too. As Tracy spoke in a sweet voice, Brian grinned. Tracy, you are good at expressing gratitude. Such a good girl. I can't wait to marry you. As Tracy made a pouting face, she said, It's true. Hurry up and divorce that old lady and become my husband, okay? Our baby is going to be born soon. Just wait a little longer. I'll sort everything out while she's on her business trip abroad. After that, Tracy, you, this child, and I will live happily. We can live luxuriously with the money from selling the house and car. As the video played to that point, I spoke up. Tracy, you knew he was married, didn't you? Brian was pale. To him, I dropped another bombshell. And yet you call that a pure? What exactly do you mean by pure? Brian shouted, What are you trying to say? Here, take a good look. This is what I found when I investigated Tracy. I scattered several photos on the floor, and as Brian looked down at them, his face grew paler. What is this? Who are these men? The photos showed evidence of Tracy being involved with multiple men, intimately linking arms, entering hotels, and even at an OB/GYN clinic with a man who wasn't Brian. That's the real Tracy for you. She's been targeting famous streamers to establish relationships. You probably started as just a streamer and a fan, right? Brian was speechless, kneeling, clutching Tracy's photo, and looking dazed. Then, in a voice that seemed almost sympathetic, I told him, You're something, raising a child whose father you might not even know. Brian murmured as if in a trance. No way. Tracy told me I was the only one. This can't be happening. I looked down at Brian expressionlessly. He was like a shell of his former self. To him, I finally spoke. Shall I leave then? We are practically strangers now, aren't we? There's nothing more to talk about, right? Suddenly, Brian snapped to attention and screamed at me. If you hadn't shown me this, I could have remained happy. How mean can you get? You've made me distrust everything. I could only respond with an exasperated look. That's none of my business. Do you even hear what you're saying? Well, whatever. Even if I divorce you and break up with Tracy, I'll still be happy. I have over 2 million followers as a streamer now, and I'm earning more money than you. Too bad for you, you're losing a famous streaming husband. Serves you right. Then, with a smile, I suggested, Maybe you should check your phone? Brian said, as he pulled out his phone. Then, his face grew increasingly pale. What? Over 1,000 notifications? What's going on? As he operated his phone, his expression turned to one of shock as he looked at me. Susan, you didn't. With my biggest smile of the day, I said, yes. I've spilled everything online. About you being married, about your mistress and the child, and how you treated me. Brian let out a scream that echoed through the airport lobby. Everyone's attention was drawn to us. This time, Brian truly lost his composure. What have you done? My reputation. My followers. Messages like worst man ever and betrayed are flooding in. I playfully held up my phone to him. By the way, this scene is being live streamed right now. Wow, over 1 million viewers are watching this. Wow. Brian frantically tried to snatch the phone from me, but it was already too late. After all of Brian's disgraceful remarks and his frenzy breakdown were exposed to the public, he began rolling on the floor of the airport lobby. I quietly slipped past him and headed to the taxi stand. Subsequently, Brian ignited a firestorm on the internet. Brian had originally built his reputation as a charming, slightly naive single man with a good voice, attracting many female fans. However, once it was revealed that he was married, his female fans felt betrayed. Additionally, the revelation of his mistress and their child labeled him as unfaithful, which even alienated his male fans and added fuel to the fire. Being married and secretly had a mistress and a child. But the child might not have been his after all. Brian's scandal was a sensation not only among those who knew him, but also entertained others who didn't, turning him into a subject of ridicule online. Despite issuing an apology on social media, Brian's infamy only escalated, leading to a continuous drop in followers and eventually forcing him to pause his activities. Sometime later, after work, I was leaving my office building when, unexpectedly, Brian was waiting for me. Tearfully, he begged me, I can't stream anymore. I can't even walk outside. Susan, please help me. The truth is, I only truly love you. Let's start over as husband and wife. To his delirious plea, I responded, if you keep following me, I will call the police. Since then, I haven't seen Brian. I heard through the grapevine that the child Tracy gave birth to wasn't Brian's after all. After a tumultuous saga, Brian and Tracy broke up. I mercilessly demanded compensation from both. Brian paid using his dwindling savings, while Tracy had her parents cover her share. Tracy, having been rejected by another streamer she hoped would marry her, was taken back by her strict parents to raise her child. I hope the innocent child grows up healthy. As for Brian, after paying me compensation, he found himself bankrupt when a company he had partnerships with demanded damages for tarnishing their image. Unable to rely on anyone and out of savings, Brian sought help from his in-laws, who, being decent people, declared they wanted nothing to do with him. Now, Brian, having lost his status, honor, wealth, and his supportive family, reportedly lives in a shabby apartment, virtually a broken man. Despite knowing this, I feel no sympathy for him. As for me, having returned to single life, I continue to dedicate myself to my work. Unwilling to live in the condo I shared with Brian, I decided to sell it. Fortunately, the property's value had increased over the years, enriching me considerably. The car that Brian and Tracy used was also sold to an acquaintance. With the money earned, I bought a new car. After things settled down, my sister, who had helped me, said, Susan, well done. Treat this whole ordeal as if you were bitten by a dog. And forget about him quickly so you can be happy. But next time, don't choose a man just because he's cute, okay? You're right, this experience was a lesson. I think I'm done with marriage. Living for my work suits me better. Now, I live in a new single apartment in a high-rise, pet-friendly building. Work has stabilized, so I'm planning to fulfill my long-held dream of adopting a cat. Going forward, I intend to cherish what remains in my life and live positively.